Hello and welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Reps. Well, actually, in this case, it is Rapping with the Reps, because I'm State Representative Ken Gordon, and I'm here with State Representative John Sybeck, who is the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. Welcome to our show.
Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here.
I'm delighted to have you. And as many of our audience knows, I have a particular interest in the work that your committee does. Being a labor lawyer myself, having devoted more than 2 decades to this type of work, I'm excited to be part of some of the bills that are before the committee and really interested in all of them. And we have an interest in this district both from the point of view of working families and from the point of view of the businesses that are both established and the emerging ones. So I have a few topics to bring up and talk to you about. I'd like to talk to you about the issues facing businesses, which would be covenants not to compete, we hear a lot of talk about, as well as what we call the independent contractor statute and how it applies now and can change. And I also want to talk about workforce training for people who find themselves laid off mid-career, largely in the technology fields and in healthcare, because technology has changed around them. And now the need for those services, or I'm sorry, the talents that they have may not be needed, but we can provide some opportunity for training to fill that gap so that they can be reemployed. So let's start with the issues facing our businesses, and let's start with covenants not to compete. It's an interesting issue because we have some businesses that say, look, I want to have access to the labor force. I'm opening a new high-tech business. I want to come to Burlington. I want to hire the best young talent. But I noticed that many of them become locked up because they have a covenant not to compete with their very first employer coming out of college, and I can't get to them. Other businesses come and say, we've got to protect our technology, so we need these things. What's the work that's being done in the committee now on that?
Well, I think we're looking at it and recognizing there really are 2 sides to it. As you said, it's a matter of helping businesses and recognizing the role that businesses have in terms of our economy, but also the individual employees and what's happening, from their perspective. So what we've looked at is a situation that seems to be skewed currently in terms of most of the benefits from these non-compete agreements inuring to the benefit of businesses because they're protecting those interests, they're protecting those trade secrets, if you will. But what we also learned was some horrific stories. Stories of individuals who do internships when they're in college, then find out that that internship also involved a non-compete. So the student graduates from college, graduates from graduate school, and now can't get a job in their chosen field because of that particular internship they had.
And the whole point of an internship is to prepare you to enter the job market.
Exactly. We've heard some other horrific ones. There was a young woman who was a camp counselor in Wellesley, I believe. Now the question here is was this a legitimate situation and a legitimate contract, since I don't believe she was of legal age. But the situation was that once you worked for us as a camp, or within the 10-mile radius of any of our stores. That isn't as much of an issue here in Massachusetts, as I said, because there are only 2 or 3 operations.
Right.
But in cities like Chicago, Pittsburgh, and Detroit, that restrictive covenant, that non-compete agreement, essentially says you would not be able to get a job in a fast food operation anywhere within the city limits. Yeah. And I think that's going far overboard. And the question is, what is the situation? I mean, are we talking about protecting the composition of a secret sauce? It strikes me that's far different than in the high-tech industry, than perhaps in pharmaceuticals, where there may be some legitimate interests.
Well, the issue that you raise is actually an important one, because the state of the law now is that for an employer to enforce a covenant, which is a different issue than having the employee sign one in the first place. But in order to be enforceable, the employer has to show what we call a protectable interest. So they have to demonstrate, in the case of the fast food restaurant, why is it that this person who makes sandwiches can cause you any harm at all if they work for another fast food restaurant? And I would imagine that it would be very hard for that employer to show, and so it would be hard for the employer in that case to enforce the agreement.
It would be, except,
right, okay,
except is the employee going to take that next step?
Right.
So signing the agreement that said you cannot work for anyone else within a 10-mile radius may be sufficient. And maybe 90% of the employees say, well, I'm stuck. And so they don't try to contest it. And they don't go to court in terms of looking at the legitimacy and the validity of it.
Right.
So in situations like that, the company has already won just by virtue of the nature and the fact that it scares the employee from taking the next step.
In fact, the use of that word, it scares them. What that's called is the interim effect of having that restriction. Because most people think that, well, I could talk to a lawyer, it will cost me money, and I just lost my job. Or I'm working in a fast food restaurant, I can't afford a lawyer anyway. I'm just going to take this language at its face value and rely that it's enforceable and keep myself out of the job market. So you're absolutely right. It's effective more often than not. And then the flip side of the problem is, even when it's arguable, it's up to a judge to determine whether there's a protectable interest or not. And so now it's unpredictable.
But also in Massachusetts, we're what's known as a reformation state.
Right.
So you could contest it, and the judge looks and says, this is outrageous, this is egregious. It's, for example, let's say that the agreement says that you cannot work for any restaurant within the 50 states for a period of 5 years.
Right.
Because we're a reformation state, the judge can say that's unduly restrictive.
Right.
So we'll say you can't work for a restaurant maybe in Massachusetts or in Middlesex County. And 5 years is too long, we'll say 1 year. So the judge has the authority to rewrite the agreement and say, okay, this is less egregious, so I'll now enforce that agreement. So it actually almost entices and induces companies sometimes to come with the most outrageous agreements, knowing that, as you said, the employee is scared to even contest it. And in those cases where they do, it may still be simply simplified and made less restrictive, in which case the employee still is restricted.
Right.
And it's a win-win situation in that case for the employer.
And even in that instance, the first level of going forward with this is usually two lawyers talking to each other, and because they know there's a reformation that's possible, they may try to do it first. And the employee's lawyer would say, what do you really need? What are you really afraid of?
But I also think it's important to look at the flip side. So in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, you may be an employee for a company that's working on a drug to deal with Alzheimer's, and you've been working on it for 5 or 6 years. And you may recognize that this molecule doesn't work or that molecule does. In essence, over that 5-year period, you know where the foibles of the strategy were and recognize that we really need to move in this direction. If you go to another company, you now have essentially cut 4 or 5 years off from their research. So I understand that there is a protectable interest and a legitimate interest for those companies. And what we're trying to do is reach some sort of a balance to ensure that employees aren't unduly restricted, unduly prevented or precluded from going forward, but also not providing the company with essentially carte blanche.
Right, and that's the good work that we can do, and that's the good job that we can do when we can pass legislation that balances both interests, that recognizes we perhaps have a need for a covenant not to compete in some instance, but let's restrict it. Let's do our own red pen work. Let's restrict it to some instances where we say, look, you've got to either make a certain amount of money within your job, or you have to have a certain position or certain access to certain information. Even in the instance of information, we will still have provisions that will protect disclosure of information and things like that. But like you say, there may be some employees who, just by virtue of their experience within the company, what they learned within the company, that becomes part of their makeup.
And I think the other interesting thing is the fact that California bans non-compete agreements.
Right.
And clearly it has not had an impact in terms of the economy in California and the ability to secure and recruit individuals,
right.
Nor to necessarily see a total opening of the curtain in terms of what those trade secrets are. One other piece and it goes beyond the trade secret piece, it's also non-disclosure. So similar to that, you are working for a company, you're a salesperson, you're a sales engineer. In some cases, it goes down to beauty salons, hair salons. So an individual leaves one employer, goes somewhere else, and precludes, and legitimately, that you can't simply take all those customers, recruit them, say, hey, I'm leaving company A, I'm going to company B, come with me. Let's take the business. And so I think there are legitimate issues there. So a company may invest, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of hours of time in terms of training, providing you with the necessary resources to go out and find those customers, to cultivate those customers. You simply, when you leave from company A to company B, don't have the right to simply take those customers with you.
No, but that can be handled through what we would call an anti-raid provision, which
Yes.
would say, yeah, you just can't raid our customers, but you can go there. You can't raid our employees. You can't come and take 3 employees with you, but you can still go to another company
Exactly.
if for some reason you just don't like it here.
And those are the situations that we really have to examine as we look at this legislation. And pointed out, we're looking at it, and as you well know, in the legislature, sometimes the best piece of legislation is the one that no one is happy with,
Right.
that both sides have some concerns, and hopefully we will see some action later this fall in terms of addressing this issue in a way that protects both the interests of the company, but certainly the interests of the employee as well.
Right. And what you mean by that is everyone is equally frustrated, but also equally pleased. Everyone gets about 80% of what they needed out of it, and no one is completely happy, because that's the nature of a compromise.
Exactly.
And that's the nature of business dealings with each other usually too, is you get what you really need, maybe a little bit more, but you're satisfied with that because that's what you needed to do to get things done. Another challenging provision that I know that we're dealing with deals with the independent contractor statute. The state of the law now is that for a company to bring on a temporary type of an employee directly, not through a temporary agency, is that everyone coming to a company is considered to be a W-2 employee. As such, they're subject to their rights to unemployment insurance, workers' comp, and all these other things. And sometimes an employer wants to bring on someone to do a particular project or fill a particular role or need, and they're saying, well, we know that this contract will end soon. We know we don't want to take the burden of the salary on and on and on. And so they have a purpose for doing that. But here in Massachusetts, we have a number of instances where companies have been essentially caught bringing people in like janitors or baggage handlers at the airport, where someone says, I just want a job cleaning an office building, and the company says, well, we're really not a janitorial company. What we are is a franchise company. You go ahead and buy a franchise, and with that we'll give you cleaning supplies, and you go ahead and you have your own business. Congratulations, it's the American dream. When really what they've done is they've exempted their responsibility for withholding tax, like I say, unemployment, workers' comp, all of the other employment benefits and protections that Massachusetts law provides. So we've got to balance, how are we going to address one situation without leaving these other workers in the cold?
No, you're absolutely right, and it's a situation that really varies from industry to industry.
Right.
So we heard testimony in terms of construction. So there are companies who will hire someone to install the drywall and say that they're an independent contractor. And the end result is, if they're viewed as an independent contractor, then I, as the general contractor, am not paying unemployment insurance for these individuals. I'm not paying workers' comp for these individuals. So essentially, my out-of-pocket costs are much lower than they would be if they were my employees. So that gives me a leg up and an opportunity to underbid you if we're bidding on this large project, because my labor costs are far less. And so there's certainly some unscrupulous individuals who are doing that. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes employees don't realize it until after the fact. They're hurt, and they realize that they're not eligible to collect workers' compensation. They're simply let go and are not eligible for unemployment insurance. And so essentially those employees are exploited. Now the flip side is we've got individuals in the creative economy. So we've got writers, we've got artists, we've got individuals for whom it makes a great deal of sense to be an independent contractor, who want to have that opportunity to be able to basically sell their wares, and it seems like a good fit. And so what we actually have done in the committee, after the hearing on this particular bill, advised and suggested that people from both sides, that people from the construction industry, for example, people from the creative economy, go and work together to come up with some compromise language, to really try to work out the differences, to see, can we do something that, in essence, does not continue to allow the bad actors in the construction industry to operate, but does not create a situation where the people in the creative economy now must be W-2 employees and not eligible to freelance and essentially go from job to job to job.
Right, because you bring up good distinctions. A freelancer in the creative economy, as I once was in my past career, we wanted the opportunity to write for 3 newspapers at the same time. The newspapers didn't care; they weren't competing for our services, and that was fine. They sent us a check. We were working per story. Some people worked per inch, per column inch, but that's what drove that economy. And so, this requirement, as you say, would be harmful to that type of an economy, and they wouldn't get the opportunity to write at all, which was important to them, not only because they were paying their bills, but also they were gaining that type of experience. Myself, as a very young writer, was able to take advantage of that. In the construction industry, and we know the makeup of general contractors and subcontractors, but classically the way that should work is that the workers work for somebody. So you work for the painting company, you're a W-2 employee for the painting company, and if you're injured on the job, you get workers' comp through them, or unemployment if they're laid off through them, even if you're not working for the general. The problem comes in when the individual isn't a W-2 employee of anybody. And then, like you say, that while they're working, they're saying, well, this is okay because I'm getting the difference between what I would have made as W-2. That withholding, it's not here. It's great. Until they need it, until they realize this is what it paid for.
And again, at the hearing, we heard some horrific stories of individuals who assumed they were employees and simply were not, and were viewed as independent contractors, and as a result, sustained injuries, and were not eligible for workers' compensation. Were not eligible at the end of the particular project or job for unemployment. They were viewed as an independent contractor by the purported employer, but never really identified that. And it really has been problematic, particularly in certain areas. You raised janitorial, so in some cases we're looking at low-wage jobs. The assumption is I start the work, I pay, I sign the paperwork, I've done everything I need to do, and then lo and behold, I find that I don't have the protections that every other employee really does.
Right, right. And those, in that case of the janitors or the baggage handlers, when they enter this opportunity, they're told, to have their own business, they really have no idea of all of the things that they're not getting as a result of having agreed to this. They just want to put bread on the table, and in the short run, they're able to do that. And so they enter these onerous agreements, and people talk about how in the government they say we don't create jobs. I'm not sure that that's true, but even if that's the situation, what we do is we level the playing field so that employers can evenly compete with each other. One isn't exploiting, like you say, isn't getting an advantage over the other because they're exploiting their workers, but also we create the rules of the game so that workers know that when they enter the workforce, they're being treated fairly and they know where to go.
Exactly.
One of the other issues that I know that you're working with in your committee is the issue of workforce training. And here in this district, what is most concerning to me, as I said in the outset of our show, are those middle-aged, middle-level employees who have had a productive career, showed up to work every day, done well, been promoted, but technology has changed. And so a company goes through a series of layoffs because they no longer have a need for people of particular technological knowledge, and now they're on unemployment, never having dreamed in their 50s of having been there. What are the programs that we're working on to provide some sort of training for those mid-level workers?
Well, there are a couple of things. One thing that really surprised me is that if you're one of those individuals who's been laid off, you assume that you're going to be able to find work. And the reality is that if you do not sign up immediately or within the first 20 weeks, 17 weeks, that you're interested in terms of getting training, and now that time period has come and gone, you're no longer eligible to continue to receive benefits while you're receiving that training. One of the suggestions that I've talked to the Secretary of Labor about is let's make this an automatic opt-in situation, that everyone, as soon as they go to sign up for unemployment benefits, signs up in terms of the eligibility for that training. It really is simply a paper process, but ensures that someone down the road isn't stuck with the scenario of I've not been able to find a job. I have this great opportunity now to receive training, but that training is no longer eligible, and I'm no longer able to receive benefits. That certainly is one. The second possibility is looking at where we are in terms of the Workforce Training Fund. And the Workforce Training Fund has solely been focused on incumbent workers. It doesn't focus on individuals who need to get training to get work. So if I'm a company, and I had a company in my district, manufacturer of envelopes, and they moved into my district within the last year, created a number of jobs. Essentially, they moved in did some expansion out of Albany, New York, into my district because there was an envelope company that went out of business in Springfield. So they knew they had a captive group of trained employees, and it seemed like an ideal situation. What they're now facing is the opportunity and the challenge of producing foil-lined envelopes, which are generally used for holiday cards.
Right.
Now, in that situation, they're looking at going and tapping into the Workforce Training Fund to train those existing employees to do that new line of work. It'll be an expansion from their perspective, and then we'll be able to bring other employees in to do the traditional envelope work. And this company, by the way, it's simply amazing. They're doing 500 million envelopes a year. We think about snail mail reducing. They're producing high quality, high-end envelopes. So for them, the Workforce Training Fund works because they're going to train incumbent workers to do the second line of production, maybe on a seasonal basis, and they can go back to the original line of work.
When you use the term incumbent workers, you mean workers that are already working?
Yes.
And now you're going to train them to do something different.
They're working already for this company.
Right.
We're going to train them to do something different or a new product line, something new. That doesn't help the individuals who are mid-career, who've been laid off,
Right.
who need that sort of training, who would be eligible. And so, working with you and our colleagues, we're trying to figure out ways to allow us to provide funding through the Workforce Training Fund to companies saying, okay, not only will we provide you with opportunities for funding to train existing workers, incumbent workers, but opportunities to train new workers as you see expansion happening. And that really has been one of the issues. I think for employers, it's, do I take the risk of trying to bring people on if I don't have individuals who are trained? And how do I do that? And how do I do it within the confines of my existing budget?
Right. Large companies can do that.
Yes.
Some of our large Silicon Valley-based companies in the Commonwealth or those in Cambridge can do that because they've got an economy of scale. They're going to bring in 20 workers. They're going to hire one trainer. They're going to do that. But a 5-employee company, a startup, they don't have the time or the resource to do that. And that's where we can develop a program that can help.
And they run the risk of, what's it going to cost me in terms of recruiting that person, training that person, and bring them online. And in many cases, it's thousands of dollars.
Right.
So if we can assist through the Workforce Training Fund, let's do it.
And so I appreciate some of the things you just said, and I appreciate that you're a great guest because you just brought up some of the bills that I filed, and I'm glad that it's under such consideration.
I did it unwittingly, by the way.
I walked you into it with some of the questions. But one of the issues that you raised, just to be clear, is that if a worker is on unemployment, they have a limited amount of time while they're on unemployment to receive training, to identify a training program, to identify that it's qualified. If it isn't, sometimes it's easy to get qualified because it's offering the proper training. But to do that all within the first, I think it's 12 weeks, or maybe 17 at this point. But if they don't, and if they do, they can extend their unemployment benefits as long as they're going to the training and participating, so that they don't have to choose between getting the training or getting the benefits, because they say, well, now I have to go back to work at a job that I'll be underemployed for. I've got to take less money because I'm no longer on unemployment. Now we can continue to train, so that they can contribute to our economy in a way that's the most productive. So I think that's a positive step that I'm glad we're looking into.
Similarly, we're looking at individuals who are in apprenticeship programs. I mean, the requirement to continue to receive unemployment benefits are that you have to be looking for work. If you're participating in a training program or you're an apprentice, you clearly are looking for work. You are actually moving further along in terms of identifying a particular job or a particular career area. And so it makes sense that you should be eligible to continue. The unfortunate thing is, without these benefits, without these opportunities, what we're now seeing is many of these individuals who are mid-career, people in later lives, who are taking entry-level jobs, jobs that historically have gone to our youth. So, if you go to a grocery store and you're seeing people who are middle-aged or even older who are bagging your groceries, who are working as cashiers, those are jobs that historically have gone to high school students.
That's right.
And so what we now have is another problem. So we've got this bottleneck where the availability of jobs for entry-level individuals are really shrinking, because all those jobs that are there, or a significant portion of them, are being taken by older individuals who are seeking employment. So the people who have those jobs are far overqualified and overskilled for those jobs, but it's far better for many of these people to take those jobs than continue to be on unemployment or see their unemployment benefits exhausted.
Yeah, and what adds to the problems for those folks is that when interest rates fell, their nest egg also became less valuable. What they had put away, they're not earning as much interest, and so now they're taking these jobs in their retirement, and when they're getting close to retirement, so those have been laid off, are taking entry-level jobs. People who planned on retiring at age 65 or 70 even aren't retiring anymore because they don't have the nest egg they thought they would have. And so all of that has taken opportunities away from the younger worker. And we talked about that when we were looking at raising the minimum wage in the last session. And of course, the unemployment rate among young workers is well over 20% here and nationwide. It's a little different everywhere.
Yep.
But in many instances, that's why. It had little to do with the minimum wage. It had a lot to do with these issues, that older workers are forced into entry-level positions because of the lack of training and opportunity, and also because of that investment economy.
So as we look at this globally and try to create jobs and create opportunities for people to get jobs, whether we're looking at entry-level positions, whether we're looking at individuals who are mid-career, individuals who may need to continue to work because of the loss of the nest egg, all of those people who are working, if we can increase those number of people who are entering and staying in the workforce, obviously are paying income taxes, generating revenue, which gives us the opportunity to provide the services and the things that people need and people say they want, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's transportation, and do it in a way that doesn't increase or create a greater burden on any individual. I mean, it obviously takes money. It takes more money to do this. And the best way to do this is to spread that money, spread the wealth, by having more people participating in the workforce, as opposed to looking at the existing taxpayers and say, well, I'm sorry, we're going to take a little bit more from you as we go on.
Right, because who this benefits is our economy. Who this benefits is the employers, and in the end it doesn't cost, because in the end we look at a small investment. One topic within the couple of minutes we have left I'd love to get into is a bill that I filed that calls for paid family leave, paid family and medical leave. We had a hearing on that a week ago, and we had over 100 people come and testify. And what we could see is that if we spread the cost of what it would take to allow people to receive some portion of their income when they had the birth of a child or adoption of a child, or where they have to go care for a child who's sick in the hospital, facing a very threatening crisis because it takes an extended hospital time. If we spread that among all employers, then we find that it costs $3 per employee per week to provide this benefit, or divide by 40, it means a little more than 7 cents an hour for all of our workers. Now, employers benefit from that because they have a healthier workforce. They don't have to have people coming to work that know they should be with their children. And they can compete in our district. They can compete with California companies that offer it as a matter of law, and it's inexpensive. If our companies offer this benefit, and some do, Google does, Netflix does, they have to pay it all out of their own pocket. That's expensive.
The reality is you have employees who have to make a decision.
Right.
Do I continue to work with the stress and the questions of what's going on back home by me not being there, or do I wind up simply leaving? In which case the employer now has to recruit, has to hire someone else without the experience.
Right.
And so it's going to cost you in the long run.
Right, and advertise and have
Exactly.
the uncertainty that the next employee is not as good as the one they just lost.
Exactly.
John, I really appreciate you coming here as our guest on Rapping with the Rep. We could go on. Maybe we could have another talk some other time. This has been fascinating for me. Representative John Sybeck, thank you very much for coming on to Rapping with the Rep.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.